Hi, scholars. This is Miss Martinez, and we are going to continue reading Matilda. We are at the Trunchbull, and this is chapter 8, and we're going to go ahead and read chapter 8 and 9 together. The Trunchbull. But before I get started, there's going to be questions on the bottom for you to answer, and you can send to your teacher to get reading credit for the day. So if you would like to get reading credit for the day, go ahead and answer those questions and send to your teacher. All right, the Trunchbull. In the interval, Miss Honey left the classroom and headed straight for the headmistress's study. She felt wildly excited. She had just met a small girl who possessed, or so it seemed to her, quite extraordinary qualities of brilliance. There had not been time yet to find out exactly how brilliant the child was, but Miss Honey had learned exactly how brilliant, or had learned enough to realize that something had to be done about this as soon as possible. It would be ridiculous to leave a child like that stuck in the bottom form. Normally, Miss Honey was terrified of the headmistress and kept well away from her, but at this moment, she felt ready to take on anybody. She knocked on the door of the dreaded study. "Enter," boomed a deep and dangerous voice of Miss Trunchbull. Miss Honey went in. Now, most teachers are chosen because they possess a number of fine qualities. They understand children, and they have the children's best interest at heart. They are sympathetic, they are fair, and they are deeply interested in education. Miss Trunchbull possessed none of these qualities, and how she ever got her present job was a mystery. She was above all the most formidable female. She had once been a famous athlete, and even now, the muscles were still clearly in evidence. You could see them in the bold neck, big shoulders, and in the thick arms, in the swiny wrist, and in the powerful legs. Looking at her, you got the feeling that this is someone who could bend iron bars and tear telephone dictionaries in half. Her face, I'm afraid, was neither a thing of beauty nor of joy forever. She had been an obstinate chin, a cruel mouth, and forever arrogant eyes. And as for her clothes, they were, to say the least, extremely odd. She always had on a brown cotton smock, which was pinched in around the waist with a wide leather belt. The belt was fastened in front with an enormous silver buckle. The massive thighs which emerged from out of the smock were encased in a pair of extraordinary breeches, bottled green in color and made of coarse twill. These breeches reached to just below the knees and from there on down the sportive green stockings with turnip tops, which displayed her calf muscles to perfection. On her feet, she wore flat-heeled brown boots with leather flaps. She looked, in short, more like a rather eccentric and bloodthirsty follower of the most staggered hounds and the headmistress of a nice school of children. When Miss Honey entered the study, Miss Trunchbull was standing beside her huge desk with a look of scowling impatience on her face. "Yes, Miss Honey," she said. "What is it that you want? You're looking very flushed and flustered this morning. What's the matter with you? Have those little stinkers been flicking spitballs at you?" "No, headmistress, nothing like that." "Well, what is it then? Get on with it. I'm busy." "I'm busy, woman." As she spoke, she reached out and poured herself a glass of water from a jug that's always on her desk. "There is a little girl in my class called Matilda Wormwood," Miss Honey began. "That's the daughter of the man who owns Wormwood Motors in the village," Miss Trunchbull barked. She hardly ever spoke in a normal voice. She either barked or shouted. "An excellent person, Wormwood," she went on. "I was there only yesterday. He sold me a car, almost new, only 10,000 miles. Previous owner was an old lady who took it out once a year at most. A terrific bargain. Yes, I like Wormwood, a real pillar of our society. He told me that his daughter had it was bad, a lot though. He said to watch her. He said if anything bad happened in the school, it was certain to be his daughter who did it. I haven't met the little brat yet, but I'll share about it when I do. Her father says he's a real wart." Oh, no, Miss Headmistress. That can't be right, Miss Honey cried. Oh, yes, Miss Honey, it darn well right is. Well, well is right. In fact, now I come to think of it, I bet it was her that she put the stink bomb under my desk here the first thing this morning. The place stank like sewer. Of course it was her. I shall have her for that if you see that I don't. What'd she look like? Nasty little worm. I'll be bound I've discovered, Miss Honey, during my long career as a teacher, that if a bad girl is far more dangerous creature than a bad boy, what's more, they're much harder to squash. Squashing a bad girl is like trying to squash a blue bottle. You bang on it and the darn thing isn't there. Nasty, dirty things little girls are. Glad I never was one. Oh, but you must have been a little girl once, Headmistress. Surely you were. Not for long anyways, Miss Trunchbull barked, grinning. I became a woman very quickly. She's completely off her rocker, Miss Honey told herself. She's Barney as bedbug. Miss Honey stood resolutely before the headmistress. For once, she was not going to browbeaten. I must tell you, headmistress, she said, that you were completely mistaken about Matilda putting a stink bomb under your desk. I am never mistaken, Miss Honey. But headmistress, the child only arrived in school this morning and came straight to the classroom. Don't argue with me, for heaven's sakes, woman. This little brute Matilda, or whatever her name is, stink-bombed my study. There's no doubt about it. Thank you for suggesting it. But I didn't suggest it, headmistress. Of course you did. Now, what is it that you want, Miss Honey? What are you wasting my time? I came to talk to you about Matilda, headmistress. I have extraordinary things to report about the child. May I please tell you what happened in class? I suppose she set fire to your skirt and scorched your knickers, Miss Trunchbull snorted. No, no, Miss Honey cried out. Matilda's a genius. At the mention of this word, Miss Trunchbull's face turned purple, and her whole body seemed to swell up like a bullfrog's. A genius, she shouted. What piffle is this that you are talking, madame? You must be out of your mind. I have father's word for it that the child is a gangster. Her father is wrong, headmistress. Don't be a twerp, Miss Honey. You have met the little beast for only half an hour, and her father has known her whole life. But Miss Honey was determined to have her say, and she now began to describe some amazing things. Matilda had done with arithmetic. So she's learned a few times tables by heart, has she? Miss Trunchbull barked. My dear woman, that doesn't make her a genius, it makes her a parrot. But headmistress, she can read. So can I, Miss Trunchbull snapped. It is my opinion, Miss Honey said, that Matilda should be taken out of my form and placed immediately at the top form with 11-year-olds. Ha! Snorted Miss Trunchbull. So you want to get rid of her, do you? So you can't handle her. So now you want to unload her on the wretched Miss Plimpsmole. In the top form, well, she will cause even more chaos. No, no, cried Miss Honey. That's not my reason at all. Oh, yes, it is, shouted Trunchbull. I can see right through the little plot, madame. And my answer is no. Matilda stays where she is, and it is up to you to see that she behaves herself. But headmistress, please, not another word, shouted Mrs. Trunchbull. And in any case, I have a rule in this school that all children remain in their own age groups, regardless of ability. Great Scott, I'm not having a little 5-year-old bragging and sitting with the senior girls with the boys at the top of the form. Who ever heard of such a thing? Miss Honey stood there, helpless, before this great redneck giant. There was a lot more she would like to have said, but she knew it was useless. She said softly, Very well, then. It is up to you, headmistress. You're right, it's up to me, Miss Trunchbull bellowed. And don't forget, madame, that we are dealing here with a little viper who put a stink bomb under my desk. She did not do that, headmistress. Of course she did, Miss Trunchbull boomed, and I'll tell you what. I wish to heavens I was still allowed to birch and belt as I did in the good old days. I had roasted Matilda's bottom so she couldn't sit down for a month. Miss Honey turned and walked out of the study, feeling depressed, but by no means defeated. I'm going to do something about this child, she told herself. I don't know what it will be, but I shall find a way to help her in the end. Oof. Wow, Miss Trunchbull is not believing Miss Honey. Let's go ahead and read the parrots. Chapter 9. When Miss Honey emerged from the headmistress' study, most of the children were outside in the playground. Her first move was to go around to the various teachers who taught the senior class and borrowed from them a number of textbooks, books on algebra, geometry, French, English literature, and the like. Then she sought out Matilda and called her in her classroom. There is no point, she said, in you sitting in class and doing nothing while I'm teaching the rest of the form the 2 times tables and how to spell cat and rat and mouse. So, during each lesson, I shall give you one of these textbooks to study. At the end of the lesson, you can come up to me with your questions if you have any, and I shall try to help you. How does that sound? Thank you, Miss Honey, Matilda said. That sounds fine. I am sure, Miss Honey said, that we'll be able to get you moved into a much higher form later on, but for the moment, the headmistress wishes that you stay here where you are. Very well, Miss Honey, Matilda said. Thank you so much for getting those books for me. What a nice child she is, Miss Honey thought. I don't care what her father said about her. She seems very quiet and gentle to me, and not a bit stuck up, in spite of her brilliance. In fact, she hardly seems aware of it. So when the class reassembled, Matilda went to her desk and began to study a textbook on geometry, which Miss Honey had given her. The teacher kept half an eye on her all the time, and I noticed that child very soon became deeply absorbed in the book. She never glanced up once during the entire lesson. Miss Honey, meanwhile, was making another decision. She was deciding that she was going to go herself and have a secret talk with Matilda's mother and father as soon as possible. She simply refused to let the matter rest where it was. The whole thing was ridiculous. She couldn't believe that the parents were totally unaware of their daughter's remarkable talents. After all, Mr. Wormwood was a successful motor car dealer, so she presumed that he was a fairly intelligent man himself. In any event, parents never underestimated the abilities of their own children. Quite the reverse. Sometimes it was well impossible for a teacher to convince the proud father or mother that their beloved offspring was a complete nitwit. Miss Honey felt confident that she would have no difficulty in convincing Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that Matilda was something very special indeed. The trouble was going to be to stop them from getting over-enthusiastic. And now, Miss Honey hopes to begin to expand even further. She started wondering whether permission might not be sought from the parents to give her private tuition to Matilda after school. The prospect of coaching a child is brilliant, and as this appealed enormously to her professional instinct as a teacher. And suddenly, she decided that she would go and call Mr. and Mrs. Wormwood that very evening. She would go fairly late, between 9 and 10 o'clock, when Matilda was sure to be in bed. And that is precisely what she did. Having got the address from the school records, Miss Honey set out and walked her from her home to Mr. Wormwood's house. Shortly after 9, she found the house, and it was a pleasant street where each smallish building was separated from its neighbors by a bit of garden. It was a modern brick house that could not have been cheap to buy, and the name of the gate said Cossy Nosy Cook. Might have been better, Miss Honey thought. She was given to playing with words in that way. She walked up the path and rang the bell, and while she stood waiting, she could hear the television blaring inside. The door was opened by a small, rattly-looking man with a thin, ratty mustache, who was wearing a sports coat and had an orange and red stripe in the material. Yes, he said, peering out at Miss Honey. If you're selling raffle tickets, I don't want any. I'm not, Miss Honey said, and please forgive me for butting in on you like this. I am Matilda's teacher at school, and it is important that I have a word with you and your wife. Got in trouble already, has she? Miss Wormwood said, blocking the doorway. Well, she's your responsibility from now on. You'll have to deal with her. She's not in trouble at all, Miss Honey said. I have come with good news about her. Quite startling news, Mr. Wormwood. Do you think I might come in for a few minutes to talk to you about Matilda? Well, we are right in the middle of watching our favorite programs, Mr. Wormwood said. This is most inconvenient. Why don't you come back some other time? Miss Honey began to lose patience. Mr. Wormwood, she said, if you think some rotten TV program is more important than your daughter's future, you ought to not be a parent. Why don't you switch off that darn thing and listen to me? That shook Mr. Wormwood. He was not used to being spoken to in this way. He peered carefully at the slim, frail woman who stood so resolutely out on the porch. Oh, very well then, he snapped. Come on in, let's get it over with. Miss Honey stepped briskly inside. Mrs. Wormwood isn't going to like this. Thank you for this, the man said as he led her in the sitting room, with the large platinum blonde woman was gazing rapturously at the TV screen. Who is this? Who is it? The woman said, not looking around. Some school teacher, Mr. Wormwood said. She says she's got to talk to us about Matilda. He crossed to the TV and turned down the sound, but left the pictures on the screen. Don't do that, Harry, Mrs. Wormwood cried out. Willard is just about to propose to Angelica. You can still watch it while we're talking, Mr. Wormwood said. This is Matilda's teacher. She says she's got some sort of news to give us. My name is Jennifer Honey, Miss Honey said. How do you do, Mrs. Wormwood? Mrs. Wormwood glared at her and said, What's the trouble then? Nobody invited Miss Honey to sit down, so she chose a chair and sat down anyway. This, she said, was your daughter's first day at school. We know that, Mrs. Wormwood said, ratty about missing her program. Is that all you came to tell? Miss Honey stared hard into the other woman's wet gray eyes, and she allowed the silence to hang in the air until Mrs. Wormwood became uncomfortable. Do you wish for me to explain why I came? She said. Get on with it then, Mrs. Wormwood said. I'm sure you know, Miss Honey said, that children in the bottom class at school are not expected to be able to read or spell or juggle numbers when they first arrive. 5-year-olds cannot do that. But Matilda can do it all. And if I am to believe her, I wouldn't, Mrs. Wormwood said. She's still very ratty and losing the sound on the TV. Was she lying then? Miss Honey said, when she told me that nobody taught her to multiply or read. Did either of you teach her? Teach her what? Mr. Wormwood said. To read books, Miss Honey said. Perhaps you did teach her. Perhaps she was lying. Perhaps you have shelves full of books all over the house. I wouldn't know. Perhaps you both are great readers. Of course we read, Mr. Wormwood said. Don't be daft. I know. I read the autocar and the motor from cover to cover every week. This child has already read an astonishing number of books, Miss Honey said, from a family that loved good literature. I was simply trying to find out if it came from a family that loved good literature. We don't hold with book reading, Mr. Wormwood said. You can't make a living sitting in your fanny reading storybooks. We don't have them in the house. I see, Miss Honey said. Well, all I came to tell you was that Matilda has a brilliant mind. But I expect you knew that already. Of course I knew she could read, Mother said. She spends half of her life up there buried in some silly book. But does it not intrigue you, Miss Honey said, that a little 5-year-old child is reading long adult novels by Dickens and Hemingway? Doesn't that make you jump up and down with excitement? Not particularly. The mother said, I'm not in favor of blue stocking girls. A girl should think about making herself look attractive so she can get a good husband later on. Looks are more important than books, Miss Hungy. The name is Miss Honey, said Miss Honey. Now look at me, Miss Wormwood said. Then look at you. You chose books. I chose looks. Miss Honey looked at the plain, plump person with a smug soup-pudding face who was sitting across the room. What did you say? She asked. I said, you chose books and I chose looks, Miss Wormwood said. And who finished up the better off? Me, of course. I'm sitting pretty in a nice house with a successful businessman, and you're live slaving away teaching a lot of nasty little children the ABC. Quite right, sugar plum, Mr. Wormwood said, casting a look of such simpering sloppiness at his wife. It would have made a cat sick. Miss Honey decided that if she was going to get anywhere with these people, she must not lose her temper. I haven't told you all of it yet, she said. Matilda, so far, as I can gather at this early age, is also a kind of mathematical genius. She can multiply complicated figures in her head like lightning. What's the point of that when you can buy a calculator? Miss Wormwood said. A girl doesn't get a man by being brainy, Miss Wormwood said. Look at the film star, for instance, she added, pointing to the silent TV screen, where a bosomy female was embraced by a craggy actor in the moonlight. You don't think she got him to do that by multiplying figures at him, do you? Not likely he's going to marry her. You see, if he doesn't, she's going to live in a mansion with a butler and lots of maids. Miss Honey could hardly believe what she was hearing. She had heard parents like this existed all over the place, and that their children turned out to be delinquents and dropouts, but it was still a shock to meet a pair of them in the flesh. Matilda's trouble, she said, trying once again, is that she's so far ahead of everyone else around her, it might be worth thinking about some extra kind of private tuition. I seriously believe that she can brought up into a university standard in 2 or 3 years with proper coaching. University? Mr. Wormwood shouted, bouncing up in his chair. Who wants to go to university, for heaven's sake? All that learned there is bad habits. That is not true, Miss Honey said. If you had a heart attack this minute and you had to call a doctor, that doctor would be a university graduate. If you got sued for selling someone a rotten secondhand car, you'd have to get a lawyer, and he'd be a university graduate too. Do not despite clever people, Mr. Wormwood, but I can see we're not going to agree. I'm sorry I burst in on you like this. Miss Honey rose from her chair and walked out of the room. Mr. Wormwood followed her to the front door and said, Good of you to come, Miss Hawks or Miss Harris? It's neither, Miss Honey said, but let it go. And away she went. Throwing the hammer. We will stop at chapter 10 and it will be uploaded in the next video. Again, go ahead and answer the questions on the bottom and submit them to your teacher for credit. Can't wait to keep on reading. Bye, guys.